I don't know about you, but I've got two types of friend. There are the friends that are with you when you're having a good time. They want to party with you, they're out all night. When times are going well for you, they're having a good time too. They're my fair weather friends. Then there are the friends who are a little less exciting. They're with you through bad times and through good times. Maybe they're not the ones you want to spend all night at the pub with, but nonetheless, when you're having a bad time, they're there to help. Okay? Well, stocks can be divided into those two camps, roughly speaking. Okay? Except stock markets call the ones who are your fair weather friends cyclical, and they call the ones that are there through thick and thin defensive. And just as when you're having a bad time, you want the solid, slightly less exciting friends who will actually lend you a helping hand. Well, when stock markets are having a bad time, when markets are crumbling, you want to be in defensives most of the time. So, what makes a stock defensive? How would you go looking for such a thing, and why would it help you? That's the subject of this particular video. And at the end, I'll give you a couple of ideas as to some other videos you can look at if what I'm saying needs a bit of background context. Okay, so what are defensive stocks? Well, in a nutshell, companies can be broadly speaking divided, and are divided by fund managers and the like, into two types. There are the ones that make the stuff you kind of have to have, the essential items that you need every day, day in, day out, whether you're earning massive amounts of money, if you're lucky enough to do that, or whether you're really on your uppers financially. And then there are the firms that make the stuff you can afford, frankly, to sometimes go without. Right? So there are firms that make essential, and there are firms that make non-essential items, or if you want to see it another way, these are all words that are used. There are firms that make almost the non-discretionary items you buy every week at the supermarket, and there are the ones that make the discretionary items you buy. Now, opinion is naturally slightly divided on what these items are, but have a think about it. Stuff that you can't really do without, even in a recession. In a recession, let's think about me. I still need to shampoo my hair. I don't cut back on hair washing just because we're having a financial downturn. I still need to use the bathroom. I still need to cook. I still need water running through my taps. I still need a drink at the end of the week. If I was a smoker, I would still need the odd cigarette. All right? And those are going to be the absolute last things I would cut out of my life, even assuming I could. I've still got to heat my house. All right? So there are items really that are pretty much things I have to spend money on no matter what. Okay? There are other things, frankly, I don't. New cars, for example. Holidays, for example. I mean, lovely to have a holiday, but you can cut back. You can take fewer of them. You can cut them out of your budget altogether. I wouldn't say necessarily I'd recommend it. All right? That new car doesn't need buying this year. It could be bought next year, for example. Okay? Look around at the property market. There are people in downturns who suddenly think, oh, I can't afford to buy a second house. Lucky enough to buy the second house first time around, but I can't afford it anymore. I've got to sell it. All right? So construction can take a beating. Manufacturers quite often have a bad time because people are buying less toys, less electrical goods, that kind of stuff. All right? So that means that firms, from an investor's point of view, can be broadly split into the kind of cyclical firms that make the stuff that frankly you buy loads of when times are good, but less of when times are bad, and the ones that make the stuff, household goods and so on, that you need all the time. All right? That's useful because as an investor, you really want the steady eddies when times are bad. Okay, so how do you find these steady eddies? Because it's no good just taking that list of firms I said that were defensive, household goods, food, power, water, tobacco, alcohol, and go, well, I'll just find one of those. All right, because you might find one and it turns out to be a bit of a duffer. So what makes a solid defensive stock? Not just any old defensive stock. Okay, one you can rely on, one that will still be around in 5 to 10 years' time, won't disappear on you overnight. Okay, well, here are some clues. Number one, look for nice, steady, stable cash flows. Firms that sell things day in, day out. Household goods firms, for example, utilities firms that charge quarterly, money coming through the door as far as they're concerned on a regular basis, because that means they can pay steady, regular dividends. And a feature of defensive firms is often they offer nice, steady, stable dividend income. And that's very useful, frankly, when share prices are going nowhere. All right, they're racier counterparts in perhaps the technology sector, for example, making those flash gadgets that you could, strictly speaking, do without. Okay, they probably don't pay dividends because they reckon they're flash enough not to have to. They can wow you with the capital growth in their share price in the good times. All right, so look for stable, steady dividends backed with strong cash flow. You are going to be looking at slightly less exciting companies in the, let's say, defensive sector. You know, utility companies, for example, don't light up the place quite the same as high-tech dot-coms do, it's fair to say. And you're looking for firms that have a good solid moat, as Warren Buffett called it, a moat, an economic moat. In other words, they can defend themselves, right? They can defend their turf. One thing about defensive stocks is they stay where they are, the big, decent ones that you want to look out for, because they're able to look after their patch. Okay, so what makes a decent moat? We'll finish this video on that point. Okay, well, Michael Porter, Harvard professor, came up with 5 factors that will help you identify a firm with a strong or wide moat, if you like, as opposed to one that could come clattering down the moment economic conditions change. All right? What he said was, number 1, good, solid, strong defensive firms with wide moats tend to be in low competition sectors. All right? What makes a low competition sector? Not that many players, okay, and quite often barriers to entry. All right? That was point number 2 that he made. So you want low competition, high barriers to entry. Now, what's a barrier to entry? It stops the little whippersnapper firms getting in too quickly and taking away a defensive firm's turf. Okay, regulators can do that in the water industry, for example. Prices and so on are regulated, or it might be that it requires a huge amount of capital to set up the firm in the first place. All right, so you can't just jump in as an upstart because no one will finance the kind of growth you need to become a big defensive firm. So you've got competition, low competition, high barriers to entry, not easy for other people to come in. Supplier and customer power are points 3 and 4. You don't really want to buy into a firm that has one big supplier, because if that supplier starts turning the thumbscrews, your firm's in trouble. Right, so you don't want firms that are solely dependent on the MOD for contracts, for example. That can be unwise. And you also want firms that have a wide customer base, right? Because if a customer walks and leaves your defensive firm, you want them to be able to survive. All right, so you want, ideally, these firms to be multi-supplier and multi-customer. That way, if one supplier or one customer starts causing them trouble, they can weather it out. Okay, they can almost do without them, if you like. And some firms, Reckitt Benckises of this world, for example, qualify on that count. And then substitutes. What you don't want is a firm in a nice space in the market, generating good dividends, to suddenly find it's obsolete. All right, because it's suddenly been taken over by the latest technology. All right, you don't want to be in vinyl records when CDs come along, for example. All right, so how easily can the firm's products be substituted? All right, and what I mean by that is not, I can choose which type of cigarette I smoke. Yeah, I know that. All right, there are still not that many tobacco firms out there, for example. It's more about, has someone invented a replacement for the cigarette? All right, well, they haven't, as far as we know, but if they were to, that could put the whole business of making cigarettes into some trouble. Okay, so what we're saying is basically some firms have defensive characteristics, some have more cyclical characteristics. A diversified portfolio would of course hold both, but when times are bad, you really want to be focusing on those defensive stocks more. And what this video has done is hopefully indicate a few sectors where you can find them, 1 or 2 tests to apply, and giving you an overview of something called the 5 Forces by Michael Porter, which tell you how to hunt down those firms with a decent, wide economic moat. Now, for anyone who thinks that was a fairly whirlwind tour, here's a few other places you can go for a little bit more information. For information about cash flow and balance sheet strength, see my video on what is a balance sheet. Okay. Also take a look at what is profit. All right. And if you want background to the markets in general, try checking out videos like what is a stock exchange, okay, and also my introduction to financial markets. They will offer a little bit of context on what I've just said about the importance of hunting down the right defensive firms as an investor.